So once again, good afternoon to everybody. Today, on the behalf of our chamber, also Dutch Embassy, I have a pleasure to welcome you at our next online meeting. Today, we have very special guest from Polityka Insight, the Chief Economist, Czerniak. So from this place, thank you once again for being here with us today. Today we'll discuss about the business in times of pandemia. So we'll answer some questions about the current Polish economy and the future scenarios. We'll discuss about the measures from the government, how to save the entrepreneurs. And as always, these webinars are to bring the knowledge for you, but also to be interactive. So if you have any need to ask any question or raise the discussion, meanwhile, please feel free to do so during the presentation and also after the presentation. Just to mention, this meeting is recorded and is also broadcasted online. So if you do not wish to share any views or video, please keep yourself muted and without the video. What else? I would like to also encourage you to register for the webinars in the coming week. The details will follow in the coming newsletter tomorrow. But as always, we see each other on Tuesday and on Thursday at 3 p.m. Tuesday is roundtable, so very interactive part. Thursday is a webinar with longer presentation, but of course also with answering all your questions. So I think that's all from my side. Once again, thank you, Embassy, for co-organizing these meetings and Czerniak for being present today with us. And yeah, I pass the voice to Adam then.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here and to call in such a conference. Great to see almost all of you, because I do not see everyone, but great to see you in good health in these difficult times. I will start with a short speech presentation. I have some slides for you, but I don't want to make this part too long, because I think the most important one will be the part when I can answer your questions. So just give a brief overview on what's happening in the Polish economy and what most likely can happen in the future and what the government is doing right now. So I will start by telling you a little bit about the current situation and what we do know. Please let me allow to share my screen. So I have a couple of slides. Okay, we almost do not have any actual data on what's happening in the economy. It's very hard to guess what happened in March and what is happening right now in April. The forecast uncertainty, I will talk on that a little bit later also, but it's very, very high. As I talked today in the morning with the Minister of Finance, he told me that the Ministry of Finance does not forecast at this moment because the outlook is so blurry and there's such a huge uncertainty. So they don't want to do it at this moment. They are reacting to what's happening in the economy and trying to help entrepreneurs. But at this moment, they do not think about long term. And that's true that we have almost no information about how the economy is moving on at this moment. The only one that is hard data and to some extent also reliable is the data on electricity consumption. You might come up with some comparison of electricity usage across Europe, which shows the business activity of heavy consumers of electricity in the European Union. But we decided at Polityka Insight to dig a little bit deeper into the data, and we took the raw data on electricity consumption and then filtered out working days effect. We filtered out holiday effect, and what's the most important thing, we filtered out the weather effect. Because as you know, when it's colder, then electricity consumption increases. And when we have done that, we came up with a economic sentiment index that's based on electricity consumption. And that's what you see on your screens. And that is the best proxy that we can get right now about the state of the economy on a weekly basis. So each point that you can see here on the screen is a point for 1 week. So as you see, from the beginning of the year till the beginning of March, the electricity consumption index was roughly at 0, what showed that the economy is not booming, but it's quite stable, and electricity usage is similar to that one we have seen last year. But then we introduced here in this week the lockdown, we closed schools, and then the economic sentiment started to drop. And what's very important is that it was not a one-off drop and then a stabilization, but from week to week, we have a worsening of the situation. So companies that are energy users, so that's heavy industry, and also some part of the ICT sector, and as well also big shopping malls are cutting down their electricity usage. And in the last week that we have full data on, so from the 30th of March till the 5th of April, the index showed minus 11 points, which is the worst reading since the global financial crisis. The longest that we have in our data.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
Sorry for interrupting. This is the economic sentiment index. How does it compare to GDP growth or GDP degrees?
Okay, it's hard to compare because here we have only data on those companies that are energy consumers. So they're not covering the full amount of companies that are working the economy. These are mainly heavy industries, they are a retail trade, and this are also the ICT sector. But we do not have data on other parts of the economy which are heavily affected. So if you take into account only this economic sentiment index, you might say that we have a drop of production by about 10 percentage points on a yearly basis in those heavy energy using sector. But, and here comes my next slide, those heavy energy users are not the most affected by the current crisis. Please take into account that those sectors of the economy that were hit most just as the lockdown started, there are companies that are small and medium enterprises and mainly from the consumer services sector. So we got air transport, which value added dropped by over 90%. It's similar to what happened during the volcano eruption in Iceland back in 2010. Then we have, of course, tourism, and here a part of the short-term rental market, so a part of the housing market. Then we got also accommodation services, which has a very, very bad economic position at this moment, restaurants and recreational services. So all these groups almost does not contribute to the general usage of energy. This is, I don't know, 5 to 3% of energy use, something like that. So it's very, very small part of the energy usage. So when we talk about hard data from energy consumption, we know that energy consumption, especially in the industry sector, shows that in the beginning of April, we are at a dynamics of about minus 10% of annual growth. And in these sectors that are most affected, we have a drop of more than 50% of value added. So if I can sum this up and look a little bit into the future, here are our macroeconomic forecasts, and here we can provide only some confidence intervals. So all those economists that are producing at this moment point forecast of GDP, they are saying that GDP will grow by 1%, 0%, drop by 5%. Now, it's very hard to know that at this moment. The uncertainty is so large that it's very scenario dependent. That's why we presented our macroeconomic forecasts for the very first time in history as intervals and telling you a story. And that's what I'm trying to do right now. So if we end up in a very optimistic scenario with the lockdown by the end of April, and we'll start bringing back the economy to life since beginning of May, then I expect to have a positive GDP growth in 2020. So that the current slowdown that we experience will wait, of course, on the GDP growth for the whole year, but will still be positive as the economy rebounds, and we'll have a kind of V-shaped recovery. So we can get back very quickly to the levels of economic activity that we experienced before the pandemia.
And what do you mean with quickly, Adam, if I may ask? What is your definition of quickly?
Definition of quickly is the third quarter. So already in the summer, if we lift the lockdown at the end of April, which is very optimistic, then in summertime, we'll back at economic activity in the majority of sectors to the levels that we have experienced before the pandemia. But that's, again, I will stress that that's a very optimistic scenario, because right now all the data that we can see from the World Health Organization, so WHO, from the Ministry of Health in Poland, and also the forecast that we produce at Polityka Insight as well, show that we will go with the lockdown into May, and most likely we'll start lifting it very slowly, all those restrictions that were made in June. And that will bring us into negative territory. So this is already a scenario that has a recession. And then we have also the most pessimistic scenario, which is the lockdown that will last till the end of June, so till the end of the second quarter. And that's the scenario that you can see here, a minus 10% drop on average for the whole year of GDP. And for the second quarter, only for the second quarter in 2020, this will be a minus 35% decrease. So by 1/3, the whole economic activity will drop. And that is what you can see from the data. So you see that the industry and heavy energy users already have a drop on average by about 10%, and that's decreasing from week to week. And then, of course, that the services which experience an even faster drop in their economic activity at this moment. So that means that if we stay within a lockdown, we can experience a situation when 1/3 of the GDP in the second quarter would just evaporate. And that's the worst case scenario at this moment. And then let me finish, and then I will give you time for questions. In such a scenario, when we remain locked down, I expect that many companies will file for bankruptcy, and a lot of working places will be lost. You can see that in the worst case scenario, we expect an increase in the unemployment rate to 10% at year's end. So that will be a doubling of the unemployment rate in Poland. And that means that also consumption growth will be negative, and that the capacity of the economy, so our potential, will be much lower than before the crisis. In this scenario, this pessimistic scenario, the recovery will be very slow because people lost their jobs, because companies were closed, factories' activity was diminished. And that means that it will be hard to regain the same economic potential, even in 2021. In this pessimistic scenario, when we remain locked down till the end of the year, till the end of the second quarter, I expect that the economic activity will return to the levels from 2019 in the end of 2021. So there will be a very slow recovery. But in the optimistic scenario, that's the last one, and then I give you time for questions. I do expect that we recover, and that's why the unemployment rate at the end of 2020 will be at almost the same level as it was at the end of 2019. Okay, you had questions to this part because I have one more slide, but still that's very important. So if you have questions, feel free to ask them.
I have one question, Adam, and that's the meeting that you had this morning with Minister Kościński from Finance. He mentioned there a few things, yes? He said each month of lockdown will cost you 2% of growth. He also said that recovery, he mentioned something about, recovery for this. In my opinion was that he was not so very negative. That was my impression when it comes to telling something about the situation. What was your impression? You have heard more speeches of him. You have heard more things of him. What was your impression? What he said?
Okay, I'm not really allowed to talk about my impression because we did talk before our official interview. So I'm not allowed to talk what we've talked in private, but to give you a hint, the Minister of Finance of any given country needs to be optimistic. So I think that's all I can say, that the Minister of Finance needs to be optimistic, and you can draw your opinion out of that. But what's important in all those scenarios, and also what is important from my morning discussion with the Minister of Finance, which will be available on YouTube. So if you'd like to watch it and haven't been this morning, it will be tomorrow on YouTube, Polityka Insight Live. So that's our channel, you can subscribe it, and tomorrow there will be an interview with the Minister of Finance. But what I wanted to say, the very important thing is which of the scenarios will be the true one is the government reaction to the crisis. And that's my last slide, and the last thing that I wanted to tell you a little bit more about is the anti-crisis shield. And we dubbed it anti-crisis shield 1. That was the first one. Then was a couple of days ago the amendment of the first one. Let's call it 1.1. And then we had yesterday the anti-crisis shield 2.0. And what Minister Kościński today in the morning said, we will have more parts of this anti-crisis shield. Most likely the next one will come in 2-3 weeks' time, and will be focused on helping larger companies, and it will be also focused on investment funds, creating investment funds that will help the economy to recover after the lockdown is lifted. And the third pillar of this next forthcoming anti-crisis shield will be the amendment of the former anti-crisis shield, so 1.0, 2.0, because there are some several, shortcomings of those shields. Like, for example, in one of them, you have to bring paper documents to the ministry to get some funding from the ministry, and they want to change it, of course, to introduce some e-document sharing. But coming back to the two anti-crisis shield, the biggest number that ran throughout the media was from the first crisis shield. That was 212 billion zlotys. That's a huge amount, that's 10% of GDP. But if you look into the details, you can divide this package into 3 elements. Let's go from the right-hand side. Here you got the support that the National Bank of Poland and KNF, so National Supervision Authority, made, so these are their actions. That's changing the capital buffer for banks, providing additional liquidity to banks, and this is an amount of 70 billion zlotys that will help the banking sector. So that's not the money that will go directly to the economy, that's money that goes mostly to the banking sector, 3% of GDP, and this does not go from state coffins. That's also very important because that's from the National Bank of Poland, and there's some money that's on the banking accounts and will be released thanks to the changes that they were already introduced. Then the largest part of it are credit guarantees and liquidity measures, plenty of them, and they will cost 75 billion zlotys, that's 3.5% of GDP. However, please keep in mind that those guarantees are just guarantees and they do not increase the public deficit unless the creditor pays the credit. So these are guarantees for credits from the banking sector to mostly small and medium enterprises. So this money will be spent only when those small and medium enterprises does not pay back their credit. So please remember that that's the hugest part, but still that's not a measure that you will see right away in the general government statement for the first half of 2020. Moreover, here in this part, there are also the costs of the postponement of tax and social security contributions payments. So they are here. And then we have the actual hard expenditures of government, which we'll see right away in the statistics. This is the program to help, or better say, to co-finance wages from the government. There's a big program costing over 20 billion zlotys, which states that the government will pay 40% of the wage of an employee, the employer will pay 40%, and the employee will agree to a 20% decrease of his or her wage. And that will cost the government roughly about 20 billion zlotys when 3 million of employees will be covered by this program. At this moment, 300,000 companies wrote up for this funding. And then we have 30 billion for a public investment fund that will kick off mid-2020. That will be run by the Polish Development Fund, and this will help to regain momentum of the economy after the lockdown is lifted. And last but not least, what is very important, the anti-crisis shield from yesterday, which was very endorsed by entrepreneurs, is that the Polish Development Fund, together with the National Bank of Poland, decided to grant 1 billion zlotys of credit funding, with possible abolition of up to 75% of the credit in 2 years' time, under the condition that a given company that the credit was granted to does not make any layoffs, so it does not reduce employment throughout the whole credit period. So the National Bank of Poland will finance the Polish Development Fund in Polish PFR, and the PFR will grant from that money that it got from the National Bank of Poland, money to the banking sector, and the banks will give out a zero interest credits to companies, both micro companies, medium companies, and large companies. For each of those companies, there is another sum designed and slightly different credit conditions, but still all the companies can be granted with that money and can apply for a credit if they are in an economic strain at this moment due to the virus. Okay, that's the anti-crisis shield in general. The last thing I wanted to say about it, that it's very, very complex. Each of the documents, anti-crisis shield 1.0, 1.1, has over 100 pages. Altogether, we have about 400 pages of documentation right now of new bills. So they are covering plenty of different types of sectors, and they are taking care of different kind of market actors. But still, of course, the anti-crisis shield is not finished, and that's why the Ministry of Finance is still working on the third one and the fourth one, and most likely, if the coronavirus stays in place, the fifth one in the forthcoming weeks. Okay, that was it from me when it comes down to the presentation. So thank you for listening, but still I'm open to your questions and open to a discussion.
Yes, and I would warmly invite everybody to come in with questions. Thank you very much, Adam. We see many new faces also today. Think of Thijs Visser, Jeroen Thiel. Maybe you can bring in your questions first directed to Adam.
What was not really clear to me yet is that you said like some companies get some support if they promise that they will not lay off if they promise to not lay off their employees. Can you maybe repeat it one more time how that works, because that's quite an valid one, I would say.
Okay, I can do it right away. Yes, I know what are the rules of the discussion.
Please answer right away.
Okay. Okay, thank you for that question. Of course, the program is more complex than I explained it, because there are different conditions for different types of companies, and they divide it into small companies, large companies. They have different kind of conditions, so I won't go into all the details. If you would like, I can send it to you later on after the conference. But on general, to get this credit, you need to be in an economic strain. So what means that you need to experience a drop in your revenues by, I think, about 20% or 25% in revenues in comparison to before the coronavirus. And then you get the credit from the bank, 0 interest. And if you do not make layoffs, so if you do not cut your number of employees, it's not that you cannot, fire someone and then hire someone else, but if you do not decrease the number of employees that you have, then you will not need to repay this credit in 2 years for big companies, and I think 3 years for small companies, time in 60% to 75%. This
okay.
Also varies. So it's not the whole credit that's for you. You will need to repay something, and the condition is to get this abolition, to not have massive layoffs.
Thanks. Elro, am I allowed to ask one more question or not?
Yes, please go ahead.
I have another question, Adam. In the beginning, you showed the GDP and all kind of other measures in the most negative scenario and in a more optimistic scenario. How do you look at the dependency of the Polish economy on countries around us, like Germany, Italy now? I don't know what else is coming, because I can imagine that is also quite an influential factor on those numbers.
That's a very important question, because of course Poland is not an island, economic island. We are most dependent on Germany, and you could see that as well if you looked at, for example, the PMI index, because the Polish PMI index dropped in a similar measure than the German one. And for example, on the other side, you got Hungary, which is not that dependent on Germany. It's more dependent on the automotive industry, which got hugely hit by the crisis, and their PMI index dropped almost twice as much as the Polish one. So you can see that the Polish economy is moving in line with the German economy still, but what's very important is, in comparison to other countries in the region, say Hungary, Czechia, Slovakia, or the Baltic states, is that Poland got a strong domestic market. And we are not that connected to the external sector. Of course we are, but in comparison to smaller states, we are not that open. And that's why if we stimulate domestic consumption, we won't be that much hit by the global disruption in value chains, like as again, Hungary or Slovakia at this moment are hit. So the strong domestic market in Poland is kind of part of the economy that will help us to be more resilient to the economic shocks, especially in Italy, because Italy was in the top 5 of Polish export countries. But at this moment, we are quite happy, except of the motor industry, so that we do not experience a very, very strong, how to call it, effect of this Italian very deep recession. We are going in line with the German one, and I think that's a good comparison because we are closely connected to Germany in economic measures. Also, Germany got a very strong domestic market, which is also typical for Poland. And what's even more important, that the German government stimulus package introduced their field that can also help the Polish companies by secondary effects. If they help the German companies, this means that there will be more more demand for goods imported from Poland, and that will help us indirectly as well.
Now you have some stability in your value chain then.
So, Thijs, hi, it's Koen here. In a previous session with BNP Paribas, the models that we played with, they would indicate that after lockdowns are slowly lifted, our export out of Poland grows faster than imports into Poland. So our national accounts will, post-corona, will benefit. So that would, let's say, accelerate your recovery rates, gross domestic product. That was an eye-opener to many of us in the previous call, that exports grow faster than imports. So that would mitigate your GDP losses. Don't kill the messenger. This was a scenario playing by BNP Paribas. I thought it was interesting.
Thank you for that comment. It is a very important one, and as I think this scenario is possible, for sure it is, because after the Corona crisis, we will have shorter value chains. So this means that there will be less import, but also less export. However, and here I would like to make a comment, because only a few people are thinking about how will we get out of the crisis? What will be the exit strategy? I asked today the Minister of Finance, do you have an exit strategy? No, we are caring about not having a very deep recession right now. We'll think about exit strategy in a couple of weeks. But still, I did some research on the current crisis, and I did some comparisons to other crises that we had. Of course, this is a first in history global pandemia that affected the market at that size. But you can make some analogies to other crises. And from my opinion, it's less like the 2009 global financial crisis. It's much more like the local natural disaster crises. So if you would like to see how the economy is going out of a crisis, Polish economy, German economy, Dutch economy, then take into account what has happened, for example, in Japan after the tsunami period. And I read some very interesting papers about the current account behavior and export and imports. of Japan after the tsunami crisis, which was then a V-shaped recession. So there was a drop, hard drop in March, and then a quite fast rebound in the second quarter of the economy. But several companies that was heavily reliable on value chains, so they needed a lot of goods, intermediate goods, to regain their production capacity, had lost some of their shares in the global market. And the Japanese current account substantially dropped after the tsunami and the Fukushima disaster because of two reasons. One, exports were growing quite slow because Japanese companies lost their market in comparison, for example, to Korean companies or Chinese companies. And the second thing was, and that was something that's out of the table here, but it was important back then, that they needed to import more oil due to the Fukushima crisis. They needed other energy sources. But still, a country that was export-oriented experienced a negative current account. And what is the lesson that we need to take from that one? And I read some scientific papers on that, is that those countries who will be going out of the crisis first will have a comparative advantage in regaining the global market. And those companies from those countries, I think that will be China, I think that that will be Korea, Japan, will have a larger market share in comparison to those companies who will be still in countries where there's a lockdown. And the second takeaway from the Japanese crisis is that companies with shorter chains of value production and that are more relying on domestic production will be stronger after the crisis. So in that case, taking it back to Poland, if Poland will manage to quite fast rebuild its economy, because we started to have the lockdown very soon after the first COVID case was discovered in Poland, and the growth rate of cases in Poland is slower than in Germany and Italy and Spain. This means that we can maybe get out of the crisis sooner, and that will give us comparative advantage to companies from other European Union countries. And that is an argument for the story you presented about faster export growth than import growth in Poland. But that does not have to be something that will be regular for all the European Union countries. That will be for the countries that will go out of the crisis as the first one, and they will have some benefit.
Okay, thank you for that answer, Adam. It's good to see that we have already a good discussion going on here in this group today. Maybe we can broaden it with a few additional participants today. I'm thinking of Jeroen. I'm seeing you here for the first time today, Jeroen Thiel from Randstad.
I have a question as well, Elro, if you are looking for questions.
I'm looking for questions, absolutely. Yes, please go forward.
But maybe Jeroen wants to go first. I don't want to.
Don't worry. Go ahead, Sanne. Go ahead. No problems.
Yeah, I actually had. Well, Adam, hi. How are you? I think you did a great job this morning. It was very interesting.
Thank you.
And yeah, as it's also true that the impression I got was also that this Minister of Finance really wanted to be optimistic, wanted to sound optimistic. But then again, he also mentioned a couple of interesting things about this 2%, let's say, decline per month of lockdown, which was a question already posed by Elro. So I will skip that. I will
come back to that because that's very important. Yeah, go on.
On the exit strategy, very interesting to hear your comparison with Japan and others, especially in light of the discussions in the Netherlands now, that modelers are now predicting that not only from economical but also health and social, let's say, perspective, it's probably necessary to move into scenarios that think about a partial lockdown or an intelligent or smart lockdown for a year, maybe even 2 years. So the economic effects of that are extremely interesting to research and to look for other examples. I totally agree with that. But my question is on, well, what you hear in Poland on, there's also criticism on, let's say, the relatively low level of support of the package. And I was wondering how you read that. If you, I'm sure you can't compare all the packages in Europe, but there is in the news, well, there's some talk of it being too low. Of course, we have a 1.1 and a 1.2 and maybe another 3 or 4 to come. So that will answer part of the question, but I wonder how you view that. And my second question is on, are there any areas and sectors that are profiting actually from this? I can imagine a few. The minister this morning mentioned the e-commerce and some other, and the digitalization sector. And connected to that question about who profits or who could come out well, is also maybe circular economy, greening the economy, saving energy, etc. Will that get a boost in your view after this crisis, or will this be something that is more difficult? Because I read your article on decarbonization targets that will probably be harder to achieve for Poland. And also Polityka is mentioning that also to our minister in The Hague, Mr. Minister Wiebes, who we will have a phone call with shortly. And so I was wondering how you see that, what it will do with these kinds of other objectives, greening the economy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sana. Great to hear questions. I will start with the one I forgot to mention about this 2% or 2 percentage points, in fact, decrease in the growth rate per month, what the minister said in the morning. I don't think that this relationship is linear. That's the whole point. On average, I would agree with the minister, but that's another very interesting point that I made while studying former crises, especially natural disasters and their effect on the economy. If you have a short-term crisis, like earthquake, then you have a V-shaped recession, usually. But if you have a natural disaster that's long, for example, a drought, or a locust plague going all over the country for 2 months, or floods, then you have more of a U or even L-shaped recession. Because what happens is that a long period of economic downturn destroys the potential of the economy, which means that if you are out of the disaster itself, you have a weak economy. If you have, a right away disaster, then you can regain the full power quite quickly. If you are in the disaster for a longer period, then it's very hard to regain full operating power when it ends. That's why I think that 2% per month is not the best way to show it, because if the crisis was for 2 weeks, then it would have a really V-shaped slowdown. 2 weeks at home and then go back to work. But now you see that from the beginning of April, a lot of companies saying, okay, we are suspending our business activity. Some of them feel ready for bankruptcy. And each month, more companies will join. Even if we have the government program, it's impossible to prevent all the companies from going bankrupt, because not every company can benefit from the program. For example, some fitness gyms will have a huge problem with going through this crisis without layoffs or without just shutting down their business.
Okay, so Adam, if I may add, Adam, that seems to suggest then that the minister may have given a firm quote for the first month of lockdown, -2%. What you are saying suggests then that the second month of a lockdown is more than 3%. And the third month of lockdown even increases that damage. And so the longer you're locked down, the more fundamental is your damage. And that's bad reading for the months to come, because as you indicated, and Sanne also alluded to that, it's not over in a month, folks. This coronavirus is here to stay. And we have to take into account that we have to accommodate for at least a year or so before we can return to full normality. Yep, and if that is then the case, that's bad reading for GDPs to come.
Yeah, that's correct. However, if we are at exit strategies, I would like to mention one exit strategy I think is a very good one if the coronavirus stays here, and most likely the coronavirus will stay here until we find a vaccine for it, is the scenario of an on-off with the economy. So that you open up the economy, you go back to work, then again the number of cases increases, rises quite fast. If it breaches a given threshold, you close down the economy again. That is the scenario that I think the Brits propose. I think also in the Netherlands it's a discussion about that, on the on-off or hop on, hop off with the economy scenario. And that kind of a scenario can limit the negative effect I was talking about. So if you need to stay at home and you cannot run your business for 5 months in a row, it's much worse than if you have to run your business for 1 month, then again no, then again for 1 month, then no. If you take it into such kind of on-off steps with your business, then you do not experience the effects of a long shutdown of the economy. That's why if we manage to enter such an exit strategy that won't damage the long-term perspective and the long-term potential of the economy, then this relationship would be linear. But when I'm talking about those non-linear relationships, as you got numbers -2, then -3, then -5, and so on, then it's in a row. That's why the on-off scenario is on the table, and I think that's a quite good solution, the best I have heard since the beginning of the crisis. And now coming back, Sanne, to your questions, I have them still, I remember about them. The shield and the support of the shield. First of all, the support of the shield in the beginning was very low because the information about what the government offers to entrepreneurs was very blurred. The government was not clear about saying, what do we offer you? I don't know if you have heard, but there was a telephone line open for entrepreneurs. You could call your social security office, and one of the entrepreneurs just posted a video on which he called, and then the machine said, "Hello and welcome, please wait, you are in the line. 754 persons are in front of you waiting for the call." So that was, the problem with the government, that the entrepreneurs did not know how they can acquire help, who to contact. They contact the first person that they usually contact in such a case, or was it the tax office, or was it the social security office, so those. And both of them were just from one day to another overwhelmed with inquiries about what the government does propose. Right now, it's a little bit better. And the last package from yesterday, this 100 billion of credits, it was endorsed by all the employers and entrepreneurs organizations. So okay, that's fine, that's great. You're just giving away 100 billion. And in comparison, that's something that Germany did. Germany did a quite good job. I don't know how about Netherlands, so I cannot speak about it. But Germany did one good job. They announced the program, and 2-3 days afterwards, there was money flowing to entrepreneurs. It wasn't the same point. Right now they expect, okay, now we have a simple, easy to understand program. We can go to my bank. They give me a credit, 0 interest, and I need to worry about paying back this credit in 2 years' time. That's something that's okay with me, without any huge conditions. The conditions are quite simple. You need to have a drop in revenues, and you cannot make layoffs. Okay, simple as that in general. So that's what the entrepreneurs wanted, and they got it recently. Before that, there was plenty of programs, but no one knew how to get the money. The money was not flowing into the economy, and then people said, no, the government is doing their job wrong, in comparison, for example, to Germany. And last but not least, the branches that can profit, of course, you named some of them. I think the rest of you can name also the branches that can profit, but let's stick to the green ones, green energy branches of the economy. This depends hugely on government actions. So if the government decides to support investment in the circular economy, will engage in green bonds, then I would expect that they will benefit from the whole crisis. That's why I asked, I don't know if you have been till the end of our discussion, I asked at the end the Ministry of Finance whether this public investment funds that they are planning to introduce will be also investing in the green economy. And he said yes, some parts of it will be going on green investment, we'll be still issuing green bonds. We did not forget about that. It's not at the top of the agenda, but still when we design those programs that will help the economy to kick off after the crisis, of course, we will go green, because that's a long term and we need to comply with the Green New Deal.
Okay, Adam, thank you for answering those questions and taking them. And I would now like to give the floor to Jeroen before taking more questions. The biggest temp agency, maybe from your background and interest, some questions or some insights that you can share?
Well, some insights, or at least another perspective, which I would like to share. First of all, Adam, but also the participants, thank you for your presentation and feedback and questions. It's very interesting to talk about it and to listen to it. I had a call with my colleagues this morning, and my colleagues then talk about the managing directors of the countries surrounding me, especially in Northern Europe, the Netherlands, Germany, Belgium, and France. And what they noticed is that many of their clients and their contacts are considering to move production or to increase production in, for example, Poland, which leads to I think a positive effect for the Polish economy, especially if they would stay on the long term. Adam, is that something that you have heard before? I've been told that in 2009 there was a similar case, and this was not just one case that I heard, but a couple of them. So I'm curious whether this rings a bell with you or not at all.
Certainly it does. I've heard that story as well. And it's justified in the context of which I was talking about when I brought the experience of Japan. So the most important thing right now for companies is to shorten their value-added chains. So if they need to wait for a good from China, that is a huge problem for them, because a lot of business companies now realize, okay, we can have a global natural disaster like that pandemia, and what to do then? Everyone was, comfortable with the situation. We can have huge, very long business chains. Now we can deliver goods from China, Indonesia, India, Africa, South America without a problem in a couple of hours. Now the pandemia is revealed, it's not that easy if the global value chains break down and you are left with nothing. So if you do not get your goods from China, you cannot run your business, and you cannot switch your business activity from one day to another, from one distributor to another in a couple of weeks, and then you will lose the market. That's what I referred to when I was talking about scientific research in Japan. Those companies who had long value chains did worst off after the disaster in comparison to those who have shortened ones. So I do expect that a lot of companies, while taking kind of feedback of what had happened and to think about business strategy for the future, will think twice of lengthening their value chains into Japan, into China, Korea, or elsewhere, when they have an opportunity to maybe a little bit more expensive, but have the same goods delivered from countries like Poland. So I think that that will be a trend after we manage to get rid of the virus.
Was that also what you mentioned, Jeroen? I mean, the big production side from Asia, or was it also?
No, it's specifically Northern Europe. So the Netherlands, Belgium, France, and Germany. That's where I heard it. So you have existing companies, obviously in e-commerce, for example, where growth is possible, but also companies that are considering to move even production. Of course, that is limited by the restrictions of the border and so on. But it was clearly something that different companies in those Northern European countries are looking into. What can we do? And it's also a long-term strategy in order to deal with the losses that are being made now, which in some countries are quite severe. Talking about what I see in general is that we see a lot of our clients that really have a tough time. We also see companies that benefit from it, obviously. And something that I found an eye-opener for myself. It's not directly connected to the discussion here, but maybe interesting to share. Because I spoke with Erik Drucker about it from BMW Paribas. The way we work now, which means that a lot of people are working from home, where we have contacts with clients, with stakeholders, with our own staff, is changing, I think, our mindset for good. So I could even ask myself, do I need the office space that I have today, or could I do with half? And if you extrapolate that tremendously, then you could have a serious question how the real estate market is going to develop in the future. Because I think these kind of things in a crisis change a mindset and change an approach. Like I said, maybe not for the discussion here, but I thought it was an interesting insight that we had.
Yeah. Same goes for schools.
Can you remark to that, Adam?
Yeah, I just wanted to add. I think that the real estate market will be a market that will be worth watching in the forthcoming weeks, because right now we do not know where it ends up, but there is a very pessimistic scenario for the Polish housing market and the real estate market in general, as we're at a point of overheating. In January, February, I was talking that there is an asset price bubble emerging on the market. And right now, from one week to another, booming, really strongly booming housing market was brought to a stop. And if that stop lasts for a longer period, then we can experience a quite severe downturn in the market, which will hamper the recovery in the economy. But we do not know it at this moment. We still need a lot of data and how do investors react to the current situation and how do they see long-term perspective in the market. But that's a very good point. Thank you.
Maybe Elro, can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Well, first of all, thanks, Adam, for your very interesting presentation. Interesting to hear. I have a question a little bit in line with the earlier question from Sanne. So if we look at this public investment fund, well, you already answered the area of sustainability, but which areas do you think that this money will, because 30 billion is a lot of money, so which areas, which sectors will profit most from that investment? Because that could also create opportunities, of course.
That's very hard to tell at this moment because the government does not have plans for that. And if I would need to guess, I would say that the money will go into very similar sectors of business as it went from the Polish Development Fund before the crisis. So the Polish Development Fund did have a strategy of invest into new technology, green energy in general, and to support companies that are generating a high value added, plus companies that are important for the government policy. So energy sector in a wider sense. And that's, I think, where the money will go. But still, at this moment, no, let's say, white book was developed by the government what they want to invest in. I think they will make that decision when it comes down to analyzing the exit strategy. So which sectors of the economy will need the biggest help from the side of the government. At this moment, my wild guess would be that it will be the same investment as the PFR, so the Polish Development Fund, did before, but still there are plenty of possibilities at the moment.
But don't you think, for instance, that, you know, looking at this crisis, that, for instance, you know, part of the money will go to strengthen the healthcare sector, that we all acknowledge now is, you know, is vital for each country, or on the trends that Jeroen mentioned, that maybe local for local will become more important, that you know, you don't want to produce all your medicines in India or China, but you would like to bring them to Europe. And don't you think that this public investment fund will also, you know, look at maybe new sectors, giving everything that we have learned as part of this crisis?
I think that you might have been right about that, because that will happen so or so. So even though that those big investment funds won't be exactly aimed at those goals that you are mentioning, I think this will happen. So right now the government became more aware that they need more pharmaceuticals and pharmaceutical products to be produced in Poland, so that the import rate for that sector of the economy will be decreased. And also the healthcare system is underinvested. That's what we know already, and the government, I think, will know that they need to increase investment in the government. Whether they will do it from the very same funds, I don't know that. But as I just spoke today to the Ministry of Finance, they said that they will for sure increase in the forthcoming months the spending on healthcare. So in which direction, I don't know, by how much, I don't know, but they will do that. So I think that's a very good guess. If you, either way, either it's the big fund or some small funding within the central government budget, I don't know, but I do expect an increase in financing of the healthcare system.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you for that question, Rolf. I saw that Koen opened his microphone. Any questions from your side? Or?
Yeah, Adam, great job, by the way, super presentation.
Thanks.
Adam, there are no signs yet that this corona crisis spills over to the banking sector yet. Huh? There is plenty of supportive capital to upkeep the system banks. Is that correct? Because that is a fundamental difference with the credit crisis of 2009, yep, where we were looking at a supply crisis. Yep, the supply of capital was sincerely deranged. What we're looking at, it's sad enough, it's serious enough, it's still a demand-driven crisis. Yep, it's disposable income of consumers which fuels the downturn. No signs yet, and that's good, that is one of the few positive signs overall, no signs yet that banks are in major problems. Correct?
Yes and no, from my opinion. You're right that this crisis differs from the 2008-2009 credit crunch experience, because there was a huge problem in the financial sector, and that went over to the real economy problem because there was huge problem granting new credits to households and companies. There was a big credit crunch and the supply of credits was diminished. This time, and that's the most important difference, I think that central banks did learn from the 2009 crisis, and they did learn from the fiscal crisis in Europe as well. They need to react very fast to contain the crisis. Because if they would say, okay, you will wait and happen and deliver money if it's needed, then we would have a similar problem. Because the reaction was in the financial market in the very first days, very similar to a reaction to a bubble burst or a fiscal crisis. You know, withdrawing of capital from risky assets, flight to heavens in the financial market, drying up of the credit market. So all those problems were just the same, but the only difference was that the central banks reacted very quickly and very decisively. And that was something that was very important. And coming back to your analogy that now we have a demand crisis and then we had a supply crisis, I do not agree. I would say the opposite. Back then we had a problem with the supply, but with the supply of credits. This time, we have the problem of the supply, but of the supply of goods. So due that people would like to go to a barber, would like to go to the cinema, would like to buy some things, they cannot do it. Yeah? So we got a closing down of the economy by the government. So we got some supply restrictions, not demand restrictions, because without those restrictions, we would have still a booming economy, maybe not that fast as in 2009, but it would be in positive territory. But the first shock was like in a natural disaster. We
talk the same. Sorry, it's semantics where we misunderstand it, but we talk about the same thing.
Okay.
But all what you're saying only underlines the importance of an exit strategy. We have to fuel that economy as quickly as we can.
Yeah.
Right? We need to go for partial, what do you call it? A partial revival and stop and go. What did you call it?
Yeah, I think it's called
whatever.
On off.
Exactly. That is what we need to do as quickly as we can. We have to get rid of this lockdown mantra. We cannot afford.
Exactly. And that's, I had a very interesting talk with one of my colleagues at the Warsaw School of Economics, one of the best Polish professors in economics. And he said to me, Adam, you know, the economy and the people will not take the burden of remaining locked down for very long. If you lose your job because of the lockdown, if there's nice weather outside, if you are tired, really, what he said, of your husband or wife and your kids, you just say, I don't care about the coronavirus. I want to go back to work. And I want to work. And people would just say, like they did in Napoli a couple of days ago, I heard that. They just walk down the street, say, forget about the coronavirus. We want a normal economy. It won't be that bad. And I don't know if that will happen. That's, for me, a kind of less likely alternative scenario. But I think there is something to it, that society will want to go back to work as soon as possible in either way. So the exit strategy will need to take that into account, that people would like to go back to their business as usual things.
I think you're touching a very solid point. By the way, you're an economist. There is also forbidden language within healthcare economics. That is, what are you willing to pay for saving one life? It's never to be found in the media, but we know those data.
Yeah.
In the Dutch context, we are willing, as a society in the Netherlands, we are willing to pay 120,000 euros to save one life. It's pre-corona. It's pre-corona. Wait a minute. If the fundamental damage to the economy is already 90 billion, that's a fundamental damage already done by lockdown. And we know that we incurred 1,500 to 2,000 deaths. This corona puts all these healthcare economics, out of proportion.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think you make a good point that society will stand up at some point in time and say, wait a minute, we want to go back to work.
Yeah.
Yeah. Forgive me for saying this is an ordinary flu outbreak, right? And there are methodologies
whether is it
to
true
contain.
Or not, that will be the attitude. Whether is it true or not, whether it's a flu or not, the society will say, okay, we won't go back because it's working like the regular flu. But what's very important is for the governments, and I think that some of the governments do realize that they need to build the capacity of the healthcare system. That's what they need at the time we have right now to do, to build the capacity of the healthcare system to deal with an increase in ICU cases. So those that need intensive care. Otherwise, they will have problems like in Italy. But if they make precautions like wearing masks, I don't know if you are aware, we are made to wear masks since next Thursday in Poland. If they do that and they increase the capacity of the healthcare system a couple-fold, and why not really open up the economy in an on-off version or even fully? It depends on the size of the economy and the so-called R rate and the pandemia statistics.
Right.
May I just one final quick question for me?
I wanted to give you indeed, I wanted to give you the microphone because I saw you opened. And so also looking at the time, maybe one or two more questions, and then we finalize, I think.
Short questions, and I hope short answers as well, but it's always the other way around.
That.
No, it's about this capacity in Poland to model and to work out scenarios. What's the institute that should be doing this, and what is your assessment of the capacity? Because I know that in the Netherlands, for example, there are many organizations now offering their help to the government because this is all boiling down to, guys, basically what Koen also said, is we need to work on exit strategies, and these are very complicated and technical things to do, and we need capacity for that. So the question is, how do you assess the organization? The other one is, from a different nature, maybe we should reserve it for another time, but do you see any tendencies in Poland to become more protectionist when it comes to defending its economy? Or because we are confronted with export restrictions, especially for medical supplies. I work all day trying to, or half a day, try to reach government institutions and try to cooperate, but it's already a very defensive attitude, like, we have enough to care about and to worry about, so don't bother us, which I, to a certain degree, understand. But do you see those tendencies? Do you see protectionist sentiment?
Okay, so I think I have quick answers to your questions. To the second one, I don't see, but I presume there might be some protectionist actions in the pipeline somewhere. But at this moment, I do not see a lot of protectionist activity within the government. And coming back to the first question, I think that was the most worrisome that I've heard today with the Minister of Finance.
I agree.
That they do not have the exit strategy. Even I was not that shocked by cuts in employment in the public sector, because I could foresee that. But they said, we do not work on an exit strategy at this moment. We are dealing with what's happening right now in the economy. And that's worrisome because we need to talk about exit strategy right away. And that's one of the most important things. When, under what conditions we start to lift the lockdown, what are the preconditions? We need to know them. And that's also for the good of the society, because if a society knows, okay, we will start lifting to lockdown when, for example, number of new cases drops to 100 per day, then everyone's looking forward to it. And I say, okay, it's coming. It will be in 1 week's time or 2 weeks' time, but it's coming. That's very good for the economic sentiment, to know when the lockdowns will be lifted. And the second thing is we need to know how to support the economy and how to go on with it in case that the coronavirus remains in place. And as I heard that the Ministry of Finance is not working on that, as I know that the Ministry of Development is working hard on all those measures to help employers, employees, and so on, the Ministry of Family is doing the same. I do not expect the Ministry of Justice working on that really, or the Ministry of Internal Affairs. So that's, sorry to answer pessimistically, but I do not see an entity in the Polish government that will work on an exit strategy at this moment in a comprehensive manner.
Okay, Adam, maybe I can have, I hear that you can give now also very short answers. So I'll give a very short question, hopefully a short answer. How much, that we're talking about the on and off strategies, but if there's not such a case in the near coming weeks or months, if we continue with that, that lockdown, we have now anti-crisis shield 1.0, 2.0, and I heard you say that the government is maybe willing to even continue on that. How much more money is the government able and willing to send into the system?
That is a very good question, and I think they really do not count the money at this moment. What's very odd, but they do not. That's my impression when I talked to the National Bank of Poland, to Paweł Borys from the Polish Development Fund, to the Ministry of Finance. My impression is they go in the same direction as Mario Draghi did with the fiscal crisis in Europe. Do whatever it takes, no matter the cost. They're not counting money. So if they see a possibility to finance a given project that will help the economy to rebound, they will go for it. So I cannot tell you that that will be another 20 billion or 100 billion or 200 billion, I don't know. I know that they are in close cooperation with the National Bank of Poland, which in this case is the lender of the last resort for the government and for government entities. And they are willing to spend as much money, or in fact, one might say print as much money as the government desires at this moment. And they forget about the zloty, bond yields. They are saying everyone is doing the same right now. We'll take care about that when this whole pandemia ends, then we'll think about how much money we need to repay. At this moment, we do, like everyone, spend unlimited amount of money.
Okay, good. Well, I think we all have many more questions and we could easily fill the rest of the evening. Maybe for a next session. Adam, I think I speak for everybody if I say it was clarifying and answered many questions. Big thumbs up. Thank you very much for today, and Ada, maybe you can close off today.
Yes, I would like to thank to everybody for this really interactive meeting, and also Adam, once again, thank you for an amazing presentation. I'm sure that we could continue for the next hours, but we also don't want to take too much of your time, because you were very, very nice that you agreed for this meeting. For those who are willing, we received very nice proposal from Polityka Insight for the meetings for your company. So we'll send it out in the newsletter tomorrow, probably. So you can always follow it up, and you will find all the information there. So yeah, I think that's all from my side. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Embassy, and hopefully see you on Tuesday, Thursday, and any other times when we have our initiatives.